The letter from the HOA arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I knew before opening it that something was wrong because it had that official red border around the envelope that usually meant trouble. My name is Ryan Osborne, and I had been living peacefully in my home in Wilsonville, Oregon for 3 years before the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association decided my apple orchard was somehow theirs. The letter stated in plain language that they were claiming the 2-acre orchard behind my house as common space and planned to convert it into a community garden and playground. They gave me 30 days to remove my property from the area or face fines starting at $500 per day. I stood in my kitchen, reading the letter 3 times to make sure I understood what they were actually saying. My grandfather had planted those apple trees 40 years ago when this entire development was just farmland. When the developers came through and created Meadowbrook Hills, they specifically carved out my property to exclude the orchard because my family owned it outright. The deed was clear. The survey was clear. Everything was documented and filed with Clackamas County. But apparently, none of that mattered to Denise Patterson, the HOA president who had signed this letter with a flourish that suggested she thought she was signing the Declaration of Independence. I immediately called my real estate attorney, Marcus Webb, who had handled the purchase when I inherited the property from my grandfather 3 years ago. He picked up on the second ring. "Marcus, it's Ryan Osborne. I need you to look at something. What's going on?" His voice had that calm, measured tone that made him good at his job. "The HOA just sent me a letter claiming they own my orchard." There was a pause. "The 2 acres behind your house, the one that's explicitly excluded from the HOA boundaries. That's the one. Send me the letter. I'll review the documents and get back to you today." I scanned the letter and emailed it to him, then walked out to the orchard. The apple trees were in full bloom, their white and pink flowers creating a canopy that had been part of my family for decades. My grandfather used to bring me here as a kid, teaching me how to prune the branches and check for disease. When he died, leaving me the property was his way of making sure this little piece of history stayed in the family. The orchard wasn't just land to me. It was memory and legacy and the smell of apple blossoms every spring. My phone rang an hour later. Marcus sounded confused and slightly annoyed. I reviewed everything. There's absolutely no basis for their claim. Your property lines are clearly defined in the original plat map from 1985, before the development even existed. When they built Meadowbrook Hills in 2008, the developers specifically drew the HOA boundaries around your parcel. You're not even technically part of the HOA except for road maintenance fees. So what do? Write them back, cite the survey, and tell them to pound sand. I'll draft something official. But Ryan, be prepared for this to get ugly. HOAs don't like being told no, especially when they've already made up their minds. He was right about that part. I received Marcus's letter the next day and hand-delivered it to Denise Patterson's house that evening. She lived in one of the McMansions near the entrance of the development, the kind with columns that served no structural purpose and a lawn so perfect it looked artificial. She answered the door in yoga pants and a fleece vest, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that was probably meant to look casual but had definitely been styled. She was maybe 45, with the kind of face that smiled automatically while her eyes stayed cold. "Can I help you?" she asked, even though she knew exactly who I was. "I'm Ryan Osborne. I got your letter about my orchard." "Oh, yes." Her smile brightened in a way that made my skin crawl. "We're very excited about the new community space. It's going to be wonderful for property values." "It's not community space. It's my private property." Here's a letter from my attorney explaining why your claim has no legal basis." I handed her the envelope. She took it without looking at it. "Mr. Osborne, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. The HOA board has reviewed the plat maps, and we've determined that the area in question falls within the common space designated in the original development plan." "No, it doesn't. My family has owned that land since 1972. The development was built around it." "I'm afraid your information is incorrect." Her voice had taken on that patronizing tone people use when they think they're being patient with someone stupid. "The board has made its decision. We've already accepted bids from 3 landscaping companies to begin work next month. If anyone sets foot on my property, I'll have them arrested for trespassing." Her smile finally faded. "Mr. Osborne, I don't think you understand how HOAs work. We have legal authority over common spaces, and we've determined that your so-called orchard is common space. Fighting this will only cost you money in legal fees and fines. The smart thing would be to accept it and enjoy the new amenities. Read the letter, Miss Patterson. Have your HOA attorney read it. Then maybe you'll understand that you're wrong." I walked back to my truck, my hands shaking with anger. Behind me, I heard her door slam hard enough to rattle the windows. The next morning, I found a notice stapled to one of my apple trees. It was an official HOA violation citing me for unauthorized structures on common property and demanding immediate removal of the trees, irrigation system, and storage shed I kept in the orchard. The fine schedule started at $500 per day and escalated to $1,000 per day after 2 weeks. I took pictures of the notice and called Marcus immediately. "They're not backing down," I told him. "They just posted a violation notice on my property. That's trespassing. File a police report." I drove to the Wilsonville Police Department and filled out a report with Officer Jennifer Chen, who listened to my story with growing incredulity. "So they're claiming they own your land even though you have a deed and survey proving otherwise?" "That's exactly what's happening. And they came onto your property without permission to post this notice." "Yep," she made notes in her report. "I can document this, but unless you want to press charges, there's not much we can do. This sounds like a civil matter." "I just want it on record in case this escalates." "Smart. Keep copies of everything they send you. If they continue coming onto your property, call us immediately and we can address the trespassing issue." That evening, I got an email from the HOA with an attachment labeled "Final Notice." It informed me that failure to comply with the violation order within 7 days would result in the HOA taking direct action to remediate the common space, with all costs billed to me plus a 20% administrative fee. Marcus filed an emergency injunction the next day, asking the court to prevent the HOA from taking any action regarding my property until the matter could be properly heard. We got a hearing date 3 weeks out, which felt like an eternity when I spent every day wondering if I'd come home to find my trees being cut down. I installed security cameras around the orchard perimeter and put up no trespassing signs every 10 feet along the property line. I also printed out copies of my survey and kept them in my truck, my house, and my office, just in case. The HOA responded by scheduling an emergency meeting to discuss my hostile and uncooperative behavior. The notice of the meeting was sent to every homeowner in the development, painting me as a troublemaker who was preventing the community from enjoying planned improvements. I decided to attend the meeting, which was held in the community clubhouse on a Wednesday evening. About 30 people showed up, most of them looking curious or confused about what was happening. Denise sat at the front with the other board members. Tom Reynolds, the vice president who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and Sharon Mitchell, the treasurer who kept checking her phone. Denise called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a presentation about the proposed community garden and playground. She had mock-ups printed on poster boards showing families enjoying the space, children playing on swings, people harvesting vegetables in raised beds. It all looked very wholesome and community-minded. Unfortunately, she said, her voice taking on a somber tone, we have one resident who is standing in the way of these improvements. Ryan Osborne has refused to cooperate with the HOA's development plans for common space, and he's threatened legal action against the board. A few people turned to look at me. I raised my hand. Yes, Denise said, like she was a teacher calling on a student. I'd like to clarify something. The land you're talking about isn't common space. It's my private property, clearly delineated in the county records and survey maps. My family has owned it for over 50 years. That's your interpretation, Denise said. The board has consulted with our own surveyor, who confirms that the area falls within HOA boundaries. Then your surveyor is wrong. I have the original survey from 1985, the updated survey from when I purchased the property in 2022, and the deed that clearly shows the property lines. A woman in the audience raised her hand. Can we see those documents, of course? I pulled out my folder and started passing around copies of the survey. The room got quiet as people examined the papers. Tom Reynolds cleared his throat. Denise, these surveys are pretty clear. The orchard is outside the HOA boundaries. Tom, we've been over this. Our surveyor found discrepancies in the original plat map. What kind of discrepancies? I asked. That's not something we need to discuss in an open meeting. If you're claiming my property, I think we absolutely need to discuss it. Sharon finally looked up from her phone. Maybe we should table this until we can get both surveyors to review the documents together. There's nothing to review, Denise said, her voice getting sharp. The board has made its decision based on expert consultation. Mr. Osborne's refusal to comply is delaying improvements that will benefit the entire community. An older man in the back spoke up. I remember when they built this development. The Osborne orchard was already here. They built around it specifically. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, I said. Denise's face was getting red. This meeting is about moving forward with community improvements, not relitigating property boundaries that have already been established. By whom? I asked. Who established that my orchard is common space? The board. Based on what legal authority? Based on our authority to manage common spaces within the development. But it's not within the development. That's the whole point. The meeting devolved from there, with people talking over each other, and Denise repeatedly trying to call for order. Eventually, she adjourned the meeting and announced that the board would proceed with its plans regardless of my objections. The fines would continue to accrue, and they would take legal action to recover the costs. As people filed out, several residents came up to me expressing support. One couple, the Martins, told me they'd had their own problems with Denise trying to fine them for parking their RV in their driveway for more than 24 hours, even though their driveway was long enough that the RV wasn't visible from the street. She's power-hungry, Mrs. Martin said quietly. This isn't about community improvement. This is about her wanting control. Mr. Harrison, the older man who had spoken up during the meeting, introduced himself properly and shook my hand. Your grandfather was a good man. He used to bring me apples every fall. Don't let them take that orchard, son. I don't plan to. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 more letters from the HOA, each one more threatening than the last. The fines were supposedly accruing daily, now totaling over $8,000. They claimed they had a lien on my property for unpaid fees and fines. Marcus assured me the lien was invalid and would be removed once we got in front of a judge. They're trying to intimidate you into settling, he explained. Don't engage with them. Let everything go through me. But the HOA wasn't content with just sending letters. I came home one day to find survey stakes driven into the ground throughout my orchard, each one marked with orange tape. They had hired their own surveyor to come onto my property without permission and mark what they claimed were the correct boundaries. According to their stakes, the entire orchard was indeed within HOA boundaries. It was completely fabricated, but there it was, stakes in the ground like that made it official. I called the police again. This time, Officer Chen came out to take a report and actually seemed angry on my behalf. "This is harassment," she said, photographing the stakes. "Do you know who placed these?" "The HOA hired a surveyor. I don't know which company." "I'm going to need the name of the HOA president and any board members you know." I gave her Denise's information, and she made notes. "If they continue to come onto your property without permission, we can pursue criminal trespassing charges. Keep documenting everything." Marcus filed an additional complaint with the court about the trespassing and fraudulent survey. Our hearing was now just 5 days away, and I could tell he was getting ready for battle. "Bring every piece of documentation you have," he told me. "Original deed, all surveys, any correspondence with the HOA, photos of the trespassing, police reports, everything." I spent the weekend organizing a binder that ended up being 3 inches thick. I had documents going back to when my grandfather first purchased the property in 1972, through the development of Meadowbrook Hills in 2008, to my inheritance of the property in 2022. Every single document showed the same property boundaries, with the orchard clearly on my side of the line. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather, about the hours we'd spent in the orchard, about the way he'd taught me to recognize when the apples were ready for harvest. This wasn't just about property rights. This was about protecting something he'd built and trusted me to preserve. The hearing was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon at the Clackamas County Courthouse in Oregon City. I wore the same suit I'd worn to my grandfather's funeral, which felt appropriate. Marcus met me outside, carrying his own thick folder of documents. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." Judge Margaret Hendricks presided over the case. She was in her 60s, with gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She had the look of someone who had seen every possible variation of human stupidity and was tired of it. The HOA was represented by their attorney, a younger guy named Brett Sawyer, who had the overconfident demeanor of someone who thought he'd already won. Denise sat behind him at the plaintiff's table, wearing a business suit and an expression of righteous determination. Judge Hendricks called the case to order and asked for opening statements. Brett stood up and launched into a presentation about how HOAs serve vital functions in maintaining property values and community standards. He argued that the orchard, while historically belonging to the Osborne family, had been incorporated into the HOA boundaries when the development was created, and that Mr. Osborne's refusal to acknowledge this was preventing the community from enjoying planned improvements. "Furthermore, Your Honor, Mr. Osborne has been hostile and threatening toward HOA board members, has ignored multiple violation notices, and has refused to pay legitimate fines for violations of HOA covenants." Marcus stood up when it was our turn. "Your Honor, this case is very simple. Mr. Osborne owns a 2-acre parcel of land that has been in his family since 1972. Decades before the Meadowbrook Hills development existed. When that development was created in 2008, The developers specifically drew the HOA boundaries to exclude the Osborne property. I have the original plat map, multiple surveys, and the deed showing clear ownership. The HOA's claim has no legal basis whatsoever. Judge Hendricks looked at Brett. Counselor, do you have documentation showing that the orchard is within HOA boundaries? We do, Your Honor. We commissioned a survey that shows the boundaries were incorrectly drawn in the original plat map. You commissioned a survey that contradicts the official county records. Yes, Your Honor, we believe the county records contain errors. I see. And did you notify the county of these alleged errors? Brett hesitated. We notified Mr. Osborne, but not the county who maintains the official property records. Not yet, Your Honor. We wanted to resolve this with Mr. Osborne first. Judge Hendricks turned to Marcus. Do you have the surveys? Marcus approached the bench with the binder I'd prepared. Your Honor, I have the original 1972 deed, the 1985 survey when the property was first officially plotted, the 2008 survey when the development was created, and the 2022 survey when Mr. Osborne inherited the property. All 4 documents show identical property boundaries. The judge spent several minutes reviewing the documents, her expression growing increasingly stern. She looked up at Brett. Where is the survey you commissioned? Brett fumbled with his folder and produced a document. The judge looked at it for maybe 30 seconds before setting it down. This survey is dated 3 weeks ago and appears to have been created specifically for this dispute. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, when the issue arose, we wanted to verify the boundaries. And your surveyor determined that 4 previous surveys spanning 50 years were all wrong, and the HOA boundaries actually extend to include property that has consistently been documented as privately owned. Your Honor, we believe there were mistakes in the original plat. Judge Hendricks removed her glasses and fixed Brett with a look that could have frozen water. Counselor, I've been on the bench for 23 years. I've seen a lot of property disputes. What I haven't seen is an HOA attempting to seize private property through manufactured claims and fraudulent surveys. Does your client understand that what they're attempting could constitute theft? The color drained from Brett's face. Your Honor, I assure you there was no intent to steal anything. The board believed in good faith that the property was common space. Based on what? A survey they paid for after they'd already made that determination. Denise leaned forward and whispered something urgent to Brett. He nodded and turned back to the judge. Your Honor, may I have a moment to confer with my client? Make it quick. Brett and Denise had a heated, whispered conversation. I could see Denise getting more agitated, her face reddening as Brett apparently explained how badly this was going. Finally, Brett stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to request a continuance so we can further review the property records. Denied. We're going to resolve this today. The judge looked at me. Mr. Osborne, please approach. I walked up to the bench, my heart pounding. Tell me about this property. My grandfather bought it in 1972. He planted the apple orchard and maintained it for 40 years. When he died 3 years ago, he left it to me. The property has never been part of any HOA. When they built Meadowbrook Hills around it, the developers specifically excluded my parcel from the HOA boundaries. I pay for road maintenance but nothing else. And the HOA wants to turn it into a community garden and a playground, according to their plans. Without compensating you for taking your land, they claim it was never mine to begin with. Judge Hendricks turned to Denise. Miss Patterson, you're the HOA president. Please stand. Denise stood up, looking defiant despite the disaster unfolding around her. Miss Patterson, Did you personally review the county property records before making the determination that the orchard was common space? I reviewed the information our surveyor provided. Did you review the county records? The surveyor assured us his assessment was correct. That's not what I asked. Did you personally review the official county property records? A pause. No, Your Honor. Did anyone on the HOA board review them? I don't believe so. So you sent Mr. Osborne violation notices, threatened him with fines, came onto his property without permission, and attempted to claim his land without ever actually verifying your legal right to do so. We relied on expert advice. Expert advice that contradicted 50 years of documented property records, and you never thought to verify it with the county. Denise didn't answer. Judge Hendricks put her glasses back on and made notes. Here's my ruling. The orchard and all associated land clearly belongs to Mr. Osborne, as documented in county records dating back over 50 years. The HOA has no claim to it whatsoever. All violation notices are hereby voided. All fines are voided. The HOA is ordered to pay Mr. Osborne's legal fees, and you are ordered to never set foot on his property again without explicit written permission. If any HOA representative trespasses on Mr. Osborne's property after today, I will personally ensure they face criminal charges. She looked at Brett and Denise with open disdain. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA to issue a written apology to Mr. Osborne and to send a correction notice to all homeowners explaining that the previous communications about the orchard were based on false information. You have 14 days to comply with all of these orders. Brett tried one more time. Your Honor, about the legal fees, not negotiable. Your client attempted to seize property through intimidation and false claims. Mr. Osborne had to hire an attorney to defend his clearly established rights. You're paying his fees. Is there anything else? No, Your Honor. Then we're adjourned. Mr. Osborne, I apologize that you had to go through this. Keep your surveys and deed in a safe place, though based on the public humiliation the HOA is about to receive, I doubt they'll bother you again. Walking out of that courthouse felt like breathing for the first time in weeks. Marcus was grinning. That was one of the most thorough smackdowns I've ever witnessed. So it's really over. It's really over. They have to pay our fees, apologize publicly, and stay off your property. If they don't comply, we go back to court and it gets much worse for them. I shook his hand, thanked him about 100 times, and drove home feeling lighter than I had in a month. The survey stakes were still in my orchard, so I spent the rest of the afternoon pulling them all out and tossing them in a pile by the road. The written apology arrived 11 days later, delivered by regular mail in a plain envelope. It was one paragraph, grudgingly worded, admitting that the HOA had made an error in its assessment of property boundaries and that Ryan Osborne's orchard was private property. It was signed by all 3 board members. The correction notice to homeowners was supposedly sent out, though I never saw a copy. What I did see was the email chain that someone forwarded to me, where several homeowners were calling for Denise's resignation after learning how badly she'd mishandled the situation. 2 weeks after the hearing, Denise resigned as HOA president. Tom Reynolds took over temporarily and sent me a personal letter apologizing for the whole mess and assuring me the HOA would respect my property rights going forward. He seemed like a decent guy who had been steamrolled by Denise's personality. The check for legal fees arrived 20 days after the hearing, cutting it close to the judge's deadline. Marcus deposited it and sent me his bill, which the HOA payment covered entirely. It was maybe the only time in my life I hadn't had to pay out of pocket for legal representation. Life returned to normal after that. Spring turned to summer, and the apple blossoms became small green fruits that would mature by September. I got back into my routine of maintaining the orchard, pruning branches, checking the irrigation system, and enjoying the peace that came from being surrounded by trees my grandfather had planted. But the story didn't quite end there. In August, I was in the orchard on a Saturday morning when I heard someone calling my name. I walked toward the front of the property and found an older woman standing at the edge of the driveway, waving. "Mr. Osborne, that's me. I'm Emily Nash. I live over on Maple Street." I vaguely recognized her from the neighborhood. "What can I do for you?" I wanted to apologize for not speaking up during that whole mess with the HOA. I knew your grandfather, and I knew this orchard was his pride and joy. When Denise started talking about taking it over, I should have said something. "It's okay. It got sorted out." I also wanted to ask if you still sell apples in the fall. Your grandfather used to sell them from a stand here, and they were the best apples I've ever had. I'd forgotten about the apple stand. My grandfather had set up a little roadside stand every September and sold apples, cider, and apple butter to anyone who wanted it. It was never about the money, just about sharing what the orchard produced. "I haven't done the stand since he died," I admitted. "But maybe it's time to start again." "I hope you do. I'll be your first customer." The idea stuck with me over the next few weeks. My grandfather would have hated the thought of the apples going to waste just because I was too busy or too lazy to maintain the tradition. By early September, I'd built a new stand at the edge of the property, painted it red like the old one, and stocked it with bushels of fresh apples. Word spread quickly. People started stopping by every afternoon, buying apples and asking about the orchard. Several people mentioned they'd been following the HOA dispute and were glad I'd won. A few even asked if they could volunteer to help with the harvest. On the second Saturday the stand was open, Mr. Harrison stopped by with his grandson, a kid about 12 years old. "Wanted the boy to taste a real apple," Mr. Harrison said, handing him one from the bushel. "Not those waxy things from the supermarket." The kid bit into it, juice running down his chin, and his eyes went wide. "This is amazing." "That's what real food tastes like," I told him. Mr. Harrison paid for a half bushel and then paused. "You know what you did, standing up to that HOA, that took guts. A lot of folks would have just given in. It was my grandfather's land. I couldn't let them take it. He'd be proud of you." That hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on winning the legal battle that I hadn't really thought about whether I was living up to my grandfather's legacy. But standing there, with people coming to buy apples from trees he'd planted, continuing a tradition he'd started, I felt like maybe I was doing okay. The apple stand became a regular thing. Every fall weekend, people would stop by, and I'd make enough money to cover the orchard's maintenance costs with a little left over. More importantly, it connected me to the community in a way I hadn't been before. People would tell me stories about my grandfather, about buying apples from him, about conversations they'd had over the years. The HOA, under Tom Reynolds' leadership, became a lot more reasonable. They focused on actual community maintenance like road repairs and landscaping common areas that were actually common. The fines and violation notices became rare, reserved for genuine issues rather than petty power plays. I did see Denise one more time, about 6 months after the court hearing. I was at the grocery store in Wilsonville when I spotted her in the produce section, ironically enough, examining apples. She saw me at the same time, and her expression went through several rapid changes: recognition, embarrassment, anger, and finally resignation. For a moment I thought she might just pretend not to see me and walk away. Instead, she surprised me by walking over. "Ryan," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Denise, I owe you an apology. A real one, not the court-ordered version. I waited. I was wrong about the orchard. I got it in my head that we could do something great for the community, and I didn't do my due diligence. I just assumed we had the right because I wanted us to have the right. That was stupid and wrong, and I'm sorry. It wasn't the most eloquent apology I'd ever heard, but it sounded genuine. Thank you for saying that. For what it's worth, I resigned from the board. I know I wasn't good at it. I let the power go to my head. Takes courage to admit that. She gave a small, sad smile. Your apples are better than these. She gestured at the supermarket display. Maybe I'll stop by the stand sometime. You'd be welcome. She nodded and walked away, pushing her cart toward the checkout. I never did see her at the apple stand, but the conversation gave me some closure. She wasn't evil, just someone who had gotten caught up in being important and had lost perspective. Time moved on. The following spring, I hired a local orchard consultant to help me improve the tree's health and production. She suggested some new pruning techniques and helped me identify a few trees that needed to be replaced. One of the old trees, one of the originals my grandfather had planted, had succumbed to disease and needed to come out. I spent a whole Saturday removing that tree, and it felt like losing a piece of history. But in its place, I planted 2 new apple trees, a Honeycrisp and a Fuji, varieties my grandfather never had. It felt like honoring the past while building something new. The consultant, whose name was Rachel, became a regular visitor to the orchard. She'd stop by every few weeks to check on the trees and offer advice. She was in her 30s, passionate about sustainable agriculture, and could talk for hours about soil composition and pest management. You know, she said one afternoon as we walked through the rows of trees, this orchard could be really special. You've got heritage varieties here that most commercial growers have abandoned. People are willing to pay premium prices for apples like these. I'm not really looking to turn it into a business. I'm not saying go commercial, but you could do more than a roadside stand. Farmers markets, local restaurants, specialty stores. Share these apples with more people. I thought about it. The orchard was producing more fruit than I could sell from the stand, and a lot of it ended up going to waste or getting made into compost. If I could find ways to share it with more people, maybe that was honoring my grandfather's legacy too. By the next fall, I had accounts with 3 local restaurants and a booth at the Wilsonville Farmers Market every Sunday. The apples were popular, and I found myself actually making decent money from the orchard. Not enough to quit my day job as a software engineer, but enough that the orchard was self-sustaining and profitable. More importantly, I was meeting people and building connections. The farmers' market crowd included other small-scale farmers and producers, and I learned about crop rotation, companion planting, and organic pest control. I started implementing some of these techniques in the orchard, and the trees responded beautifully. One Sunday at the market, a woman approached my booth with 2 kids in tow. She looked at the apples with obvious appreciation. These are gorgeous. Are they organic? No pesticides or chemical fertilizers, just good soil management and integrated pest control. How much for a bushel? We talked price, and as I was bagging up her apples, one of the kids asked, "Can we see where they grow?" "Tommy, don't bother the man," the mother said. "It's not a bother," I told her. "I do orchard tours sometimes, usually for school groups. If you want to bring your kids by some weekend, I'd be happy to show them around." Her face lit up. "Really? They're doing a unit on agriculture in school, and I've been trying to find local farms that do tours." I gave her my number and told her to call when she wanted to schedule something. 2 weeks later, she brought her kids and 3 of their classmates for a Saturday morning tour. I showed them how to identify ripe apples, explained the pollination process, and let them pick their own apples to take home. The kids were fascinated, asking questions about everything from why some apples were red and some were green to whether bees were dangerous. It reminded me of being young and following my grandfather around, asking endless questions while he patiently explained how the orchard worked. After that first tour, word spread. I started getting calls from teachers and parents asking about educational visits. I set up a regular schedule, offering free tours for school groups and charging a nominal fee for private groups, enough to cover my time but not so much that it would price anyone out. The orchard had become more than just property I was defending. It had become a community resource, something that brought people together and connected them to where their food came from. It was exactly the kind of thing my grandfather would have loved. The HOA, meanwhile, had genuinely reformed under Tom Reynolds. At the annual meeting that fall, Tom proposed updating the HOA bylaws to include clearer property rights protections and a requirement that the board verify legal authority before taking any enforcement action. The measures passed unanimously. Tom caught up with me after the meeting. "I wanted you to know, we've used your situation as a cautionary tale. New board members get trained on property rights now, and we've implemented checks and balances, so no one person can make decisions like Denise did. That's good to hear. I'm sorry it took your situation to wake us up. The HOA should protect property values and maintain common spaces, not harass homeowners." No argument there. He hesitated, then added, "There's been some talk among residents about whether the community could partner with you on something orchard-related. Not claiming your land," he added quickly, seeing my expression, "but maybe sponsoring some of the educational tours for kids in the neighborhood or having a harvest festival in the community park with apples from your orchard, completely voluntary on your part." I thought about it. A year ago, I would have said no immediately, wanting nothing to do with the HOA after what they'd put me through. But Tom had proven himself to be reasonable, and the idea of involving more neighbors in the orchard's tradition appealed to me. "Let's talk about it. I'm open to ideas as long as we're clear that the orchard stays mine." "Absolutely. Your property, your rules. We just like to be good neighbors." We shook hands on it, and I left the meeting feeling like maybe, finally, things had settled into how they should have been from the beginning. The Harvest Festival happened the following September. The HOA organized it in the community park, and I provided 5 bushels of apples for activities like bobbing for apples, apple pie baking contests, and fresh cider tasting. I set up a booth with information about the orchard and signed up a dozen families for fall tours. It was a perfect early fall day, sunny and crisp, with leaves just starting to turn. Kids ran around with apple-stained faces while adults chatted and enjoyed the food trucks the HOA had brought in. Mr. Harrison was there with his extended family, 3 generations gathered under a pavilion eating apple pie. He waved me over and introduced me to his daughter and grandchildren. "This is the young man who stood up to the HOA," he told them proudly, like I was some kind of hero. "It was just property rights," I said, embarrassed. "It was principle," he corrected. "Lots of folks talk about standing up for what's right. You actually did it." As the sun set and the festival wound down, I found myself standing at the edge of the park, looking toward where my orchard lay just beyond the houses. I thought about my grandfather, about the letter from Denise that had started this whole mess, about standing in court with surveys and deeds proving what should have been obvious. It had been a fight I never wanted, but winning it had changed things in ways I never expected. The orchard wasn't just mine anymore in the possessive sense. It belonged to the community's memory and future too, even if the deed was in my name. People had a connection to it, a stake in its survival and success. That seemed right somehow. Better than letting the trees grow old without anyone appreciating them. Better than fighting with neighbors over boundary lines. The orchard was private property, but it served a public good in the way good things often do when they're allowed to exist naturally rather than being forced into boxes by bureaucracy. Rachel, the orchard consultant, found me as I was packing up my booth. "Good turnout today," she said. "Better than I expected. You've built something special here, Ryan, not just the orchard but the whole community connection around it." "My grandfather built it, I'm just trying not to screw it up," she smiled. "You're doing more than that, you're growing it. That's what good stewards do." Maybe she was right. The orchard was the same acres, the same trees, producing the same varieties of apples. But what happened with those apples, who enjoyed them, how they connected people to each other and to the land, that was evolving. That was growth. As I drove home that evening, passing houses where lights were coming on against the gathering dusk, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with winning a court case. I'd protected something worth protecting, and in doing so, I'd found a way to share it that honored both its history and its future. The survey that had saved the orchard sat in a fireproof safe in my office, along with the deed and all the other documentation of ownership. I hoped I'd never need them again, but having them gave me security. More importantly, it reminded me that sometimes the most important battles are the ones fought not for glory or profit, but simply to preserve what matters. The orchard continued to thrive, season after season. Spring blossoms gave way to summer growth, which yielded to fall harvest and winter dormancy, the ancient rhythm of the land my grandfather had understood and trusted. I was part of that rhythm now, not just an owner but a keeper of something larger than myself. And when people asked me about the HOA dispute, about standing in court with surveys and documents while a judge threw out a false claim, I always told them the same thing. Know what's yours, keep records, and never let anyone intimidate you into giving up what you have every right to keep. That apple orchard, those 2 acres of trees and memory and autumn harvest, they were mine. The survey proved it, the judge confirmed it, and no HOA would ever take them away. That was the end of it, simple and true, the way the best endings are. Years from now, maybe I'd pass the orchard to my own children or grandchildren, and I'd tell them the story of the time an HOA tried to claim it as common space. And I'd pull out that survey, yellowed with age but still legally binding, and I'd explain that sometimes protecting what matters requires standing your ground even when it would be easier to back down. The orchard would outlast me, outlast Denise and Tom and everyone else involved in this story. The trees would keep growing, keep producing, keep connecting people to the land and to each other. And somewhere in that continuity, in that persistence of growth and harvest, was everything worth fighting for. That was what the survey really represented. Not just property lines on paper, but the permanence of rightful ownership, the protection of legacy, the assurance that good things, once established, could endure against arbitrary claims and bureaucratic overreach. The orchard was mine. The survey said so. And that was all that needed to be said.